Captain America. You don't even know what this is.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy. So, in Captain America Brave New World, they say something monumental, something that changes the history of the MCU. They casually tell us that the leader was responsible for almost every major event that's happened in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that he caused the breakup of the Avengers. So, I wanted to test out this theory, so I went back through the history of the MCU, and actually, the leader's potential involvement fills several plot holes that have been bothering me for years. We're going to prove that Ross was working with Zemo to split the Avengers, and that maybe Samuel Stearns could be a key hero in the multiverse saga. That's right, it was the leader all along. Before we get rolling, just a reminder to check out our new Captain America parody shirts, the America's Ass commemorative stamp, the Cap Elevator RPG decision, Hail Hydra, or does anyone want to get out? Ross 24, together. Links for those are below. So let's review what we know about the leader from this movie. We met Samuel Stearns in The Incredible Hulk. He was a scientist who specialized in gamma radiation and biology, and he wanted to use the Hulk's blood to cure disease and make himself rich and famous. He's actually not that different from Thaddeus Ross, a guy who wants to use the Hulk's blood to create an army of super soldiers to further his own career. Now, some of Bruce's artificial blood leaks into Stearns' brain and mutates him, and in this movie we find out that Ross even upped the gamma radiation to make him even smarter and more deformed. Ross kept Stearns in his dungeon for years and used him to treat his heart condition and also to facilitate his rise to power. So the leader's superpower is basically advanced quantum statistics. He is able to take in data and to tally up the probabilities of a multitude of events occurring. And we've seen this power before in the MCU. This is the exact ability of Kang's quantum drive that we saw in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. See, Kang's time chair is able to travel the multiverse by calculating different probabilities and then navigating to the correct universe, similar to how Evelyn is able to summon different skills and everything everywhere all at once. So actually, Stearns is a perfect fit to be in the multiverse saga, but I'll talk about that a little later in the video. So consider this. Ross has kept Stearns underground for 16 years in the MCU. Ever since the events of The Incredible Hulk, he has had this human calculator telling him how to get ahead in life. And every action that Ross takes actually makes it easier for Stearns to predict the next event that will occur. For instance, when they started, the odds of Ross becoming president were very low. But after he became Secretary of State, the odds increased. So this is what makes a villain like the leader so powerful. He can influence events that increase the odds of the next event occurring. And the more data he absorbs, the more accurate his predictions can be. So now, let's apply all of this to the history of the MCU. Stearns probably spent his first few years underground absorbing data and slowly mutating. And I'm going to have to assume that Ross provided him with all of the national security data that he personally had access to. So presumably, Ross would have known about the Avengers initiative. I mean, remember, Tony Stark rocked up and tried to recruit Emil Blonsky into the Avengers, events that were detailed in the Consultant Marvel one-shot. So Stearns would then be able to predict the formation of the Avengers and then plot how they could help Ross's rise to power. And he did this by predicting 5 key events: alien invasion, the fall of S.H.I.E.L.D., the Avengers overreach, the Avengers breakup, and finally the government consolidation of power. So you guys know that this is going to be a huge year for us nerds. We have an embarrassment of riches with Star Wars and DC and Marvel movies and shows, and for me, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like, I love my job, but when we get really busy like this, my anxiety kicks into high gear, and to cope with my high anxiety, I developed these facial tics where I'll clench my jaw or bite the inside of my mouth. And these kind of oral fixation habits are really self-destructive, and I'm sure that you guys have your own bad habits that you use to cope with stress. So my major New Year's resolution this year was to get control of my anxiety and to end those bad oral fixation habits. So I'm glad that I have Fume. They're the sponsor of this video. Fume is an award-winning flavored air device that draws flavor into your mouth and not into your lungs. It's a great way to satisfy your oral fixation with non-toxic flavors, and it's safe to use anywhere. So I want to show you guys, there is no vapor in here. This does not need batteries, and you don't need to charge it. It just has these plant-based cores that come in delicious flavors like crisp mint, orange vanilla, raspberry lemon, and many more. So with this flavored air, you can satisfy your oral fixation through a passive diffusion system that uses no electronics, vapor, or combustion. Also, I like the way it looks, and I love how it's weighted, and it's also a great fidget tool that makes an incredibly satisfying sound. Fume is also a huge money saver at a third of the cost of your bad habit. It's completely safe, and they continuously invest in third-party studies to ensure the safety of their products, and it's backed by doctors in the United States. Fume has already helped more than 300,000 people build better habits. Now, if you try Fume today and order a journey pack using our code ScreenCrush, you'll also get a free Fume topper, an awesome accessory to help level up your experience. So go to tryfume.com/ScreenCrush or scan the QR code on screen right now. Now, back to what I was saying.
Hey, wait, how could the leader know that aliens were going to invade Earth?
Well, at first, Stearns would have no idea that aliens could arrive on Earth. Like, the universe is far too vast, and with our current technology, it would take us centuries to travel to the nearest star. But then, Thor shows up and proves that interstellar technology does exist. Stearns would then absorb data on Einstein-Rosen bridges and conclude that more and more aliens would continue to appear on Earth. Unfortunately, we know this from our own colonial history. When an explorer shows up, they are always followed by more and more strangers until finally they are followed by an entire army and an invading force. Stearns would also realize that the Thor of legend was actually an alien this whole time, and this would then mean that aliens had been visiting Earth for centuries. So I think he would be able to easily deduce that many heroes of legend, like the Eternals, were also aliens. And the knowledge that aliens had been on Earth for thousands of years is more data to feed Stearns, so he's more able to predict certain disasters occurring that would disrupt human society. So Stearns would have been able to predict the Battle of New York and how it would change the world. Now, he may not have known the name of the aliens that would invade, but he knew that some force would arrive on Earth and could probably give you a time window based on his knowledge of Einstein-Rosen bridges that Jane Foster had published. So this means that he would have helped Ross use the Battle of New York to get ahead. Now, at the time, Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. answered to a government body called the World Security Council.
Yeah, but person, are you just going back through history and saying that Stearns did everything?
Yeah, but think about it. All of these events had to unfold in just the right way to bring Ross to power. Like, if Hydra would have been stopped earlier, S.H.I.E.L.D. would have stayed in control. No need for Ross. If the Avengers would have proved to have been competent stewards of the Earth, there's no need for Ross. Everything that happened benefited Ross because Stearns was guiding these events the entire time from the shadows. So he would have helped Ross use the Battle of New York to get ahead. The sudden appearance of aliens would make some people linger for the normalcy of the past. Normalcy that Ross would later promise them. And because Stearns read Fury's Avengers initiative, he would know that Fury had no intention of keeping the heroes on a tight leash.
I'm not currently tracking their whereabouts. I'd say they've earned a leave of absence.
You see, Fury believed in the heroes, so he trusted them to go their separate ways and come together later because
We'll need them to.
And Stearns would be able to calculate the inevitable, that it was only a matter of time before the heroes would screw up and the people would want the government to step in. And this brings us to the fall of S.H.I.E.L.D. I 100% think that Stearns would have deduced that Hydra was part of S.H.I.E.L.D.
But how? It was such a well-kept secret. I mean, even Nick Fury did not know.
Yes, but as we see at Age of Ultron, numerous S.H.I.E.L.D. bases were actually Hydra bases, which means that there was always a paper trail. Someone like Stearns can analyze a paper trail and its data to deduce the truth. And Zola's algorithm was also a Hydra creation that existed on S.H.I.E.L.D. servers. So if the leader is as smart as he is in the comics, he would have been able to deduce that S.H.I.E.L.D. was rotting away from the inside. And this is where Ross comes in. For him to rise to power, S.H.I.E.L.D. and the World Security Council would have to fail. But also, Stearns would have to make sure that Hydra's takeover did not succeed. And he knew that Hydra's greatest asset here was the Winter Soldier.
But the Winter Soldier was a secret.
The Winter Soldier was a known entity. Isaiah Bradley reported his fight with him to his superiors.
We met in 51.
If by met you mean I whooped your ass, then yeah.
And Natasha even knew about him.
Most of the intelligence community doesn't believe he exists. The ones that do call him the Winter Soldier.
And this marks a point of interference. Stearns had to make sure that Hydra's attempted takeover of the world failed, so he had to neutralize the Winter Soldier. And the only way to neutralize this threat was to put him against the other super soldier, his old army buddy, Steve Rogers. I mean, think about it. Isn't it weird that the pirates at the start of the Winter Soldier just happened to hijack a ship that carried data about Project Insight? I think Stearns/Ross could have tipped off the pirates, and that Stearns would be able to predict that Fury would then send in Steve Rogers to help.
I sent the greatest soldier in history to make sure that didn't happen.
So this sets up a chain of events that would make it easier and easier for Stearns to predict the next action that would occur. In Brave New World, Stearns shows that he's able to predict how people will act based on their history and behaviors. So of course, he would know that Steve Rogers would do anything to save his old buddy, Bucky Barnes. Now, after S.H.I.E.L.D. falls, Stearns Stearns could predict the probability that the Avengers would step in to fill the power vacuum, and because the Avengers are made up of passionate, illogical individuals, he would know that they would overreach in some way. He may not be able to predict the Mind Stone in Ultron because he didn't have access to all of that data. But remember, when Age of Ultron starts, Tony Stark and the Avengers are already starting to overreach. We see anti-Avengers graffiti, and Tony is employing his Iron Legion as soldiers to keep the peace. Ultron only accelerated the backlash that eventually took down the team. But think about it. Who tipped off the Avengers about the last Hydra base that guarded their most valuable asset? By analyzing S.H.I.E.L.D. data, Stearns could have found out that Hydra was keeping this very powerful cosmic artifact in this castle. So, rather than send in S.H.I.E.L.D. or the military, they tipped off the Avengers because he knew that giving Tony Stark a powerful cosmic artifact would probably accelerate his own destructive tendencies. Now, after Age of Ultron, Ross became a political leader and Secretary of State. He always said that these enhanced people were dangerous, and all of these events have proven him right. And as I said earlier, the more events that fall into place, the easier it is for Stearns to predict the future, and the easier it is for Ross to make these dominoes continue to fall. For example, the Avengers weren't put in check because of Ultron. They were put in check because of Lagos. That was the nail in the coffin. And on that mission, the team is tracking down Brock Rumlow after getting intel that he had a biological weapon. And where did they get that intel from? They got it through back channels from Ross. And that brings us to Captain America Civil War and how Brave New World can finally fill in some of the glaring plot holes in that film. It's always bothered me that for Zemo's plan to succeed, certain events had to fall exactly into place, events that he had no control over. For instance, the Sokovia Accords were already dividing the Avengers, and Zemo had nothing to do with the Accords. And as we'll talk about, there are other events in the movie where Zemo had to have an accomplice on the inside, and that accomplice was Ross. Or at the very least, it was Stearns working on Ross's behalf and without his knowledge. So as I mentioned, Zemo's plan only worked because the Sokovia Accords had already divided the team. And who created the Accords? Ross. Stearns could have easily predicted that Stark and Rogers would end up on different ideological sides, so all he then had to do was to exploit those divides.
Yeah, but how would he have known all this information?
Well, at the end of Winter Soldier, Natasha dumped all of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s files on the internet. Zemo tells us that most of them were decrypted, but he was able to work them out. So if Zemo was able to decrypt S.H.I.E.L.D.'s files with time and patience, then the leader definitely could have worked it out in like a few seconds, and he would have worked it out years earlier when Ross initially gave him access to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s files. So everything that Hydra knew, everything that S.H.I.E.L.D. knew, Stearns has known for years. Now the movie makes it seem like Zemo is a lone wolf, but there are signs that his plan had to be a conspiracy. For instance, Sharon Carter gives Steve intel on where to find Bucky, and this leads to Bucky being apprehended and taken to the facility where Zemo brainwashes him. Now, if they had captured Bucky at a different time and place, then he might have been taken to the raft and then placed in a cell that was out of Zemo's reach. Ross could have also fed Zemo information about the psychiatrist who Zemo could then murder and impersonate. Ross could make sure that the psychiatrist was admitted to see Bucky at the exact right moment for that EMP to blow and knock out all of the power in the city. Zemo could control the time of the EMP's delivery, but he could not control the time that he was allowed in to see Bucky. And later, Sharon is able to smuggle Sam and Steve their gear. But how did she get that gear out? She had help from Thunderbolt Ross. Stearns calculated that the heroes would eventually revert to what they do best, fighting. And this would create a big, disastrous spectacle. And that spectacle only benefited one man, Ross. The battle at the airport made it seem like the heroes were overgrown children that needed to be kept in check. Kept in check by Ross. Ross is able to position himself as a champion of the everyman. Like his campaign slogan says, they don't need the heroes, they just need everyone, all the normal people to work together. Ross sells himself as an ordinary man who is able to stand up against these dangerous enhanced individuals. A year earlier, arresting superheroes would have been the most unpopular move anyone could possibly make. It would have been political suicide. But the superheroes were able to make an angry guy like Ross appear to be the more tempered option. But I also think that Ross and Zemo would have conspired together because they share something in common, a distaste for enhanced individuals. As Zemo says,
The desire to become a superhuman cannot be separated from supremacist ideals.
And you know, Ross takes a similar view.
Enhanced individuals who routinely ignore sovereign borders and inflict their will wherever they choose.
At the end of Civil War, Ross gets exactly what he wanted. He is in control of enhanced individuals, and all of those individuals who might have defied him are placed behind bars or they are international fugitives. Until now, we thought this was all just luck, but Brave New World revealed that this was all due to Stearns' careful planning. But his plan wasn't done. See, Stearns made a deal with Ross. After Ross becomes president, he would set Stearns free, and Captain America Civil War introduced certain geopolitical factors that were about to change the makeup of world governing bodies. In that movie, a superhuman dressed as a cat uses vibranium weapons to fight superheroes.
So you like cats?
Sam.
Tipping off Stearns that there was more to Wakanda than meets the eye. Stearns would also have looked at the sheer amount of vibranium that Ultron used to make Sokovia fly, and then he would deduce that Wakanda is not actually the humble farming nation they pretended to be. Now, in the comics, there was also a long history of European nations trying to invade Wakanda but then being beaten back. And we already saw that Wakanda was on Fury's map. So, some people in the world knew that this nation had secrets, and then he would have calculated the eventual unrest that a Wakandan superpower would cause to the Western world. Now, he could not have predicted Killmonger. Again, he didn't have the data for that. But he could predict that the nations of the world would become increasingly paranoid and jealous, leading everybody to look for a new leader to unite them. Again, that leader, it turns out, was Ross. Now, Stearns also could not have predicted Thanos and the blip. He didn't have enough data to know about these factors. However, I think he could have been able to predict another alien invasion. Again, look at our own history. When an invading colonial force is defeated, they always come back with greater numbers. Stearns would reason that there would be some kind of retaliation after the Battle of New York, and this is the final event that leads to the government consolidating power. The blip should have proven that the world needs the Avengers, but the opposite happens. The blip shows people that the heroes were never enough because they failed. Afterwards, the government pours money into their own space defense agency, SWORD. So Ross makes sure that they appoint an incompetent SWORD director, leading to Fury taking over the agency and going into space where he can't cause Ross any problems. We also see that, both during and after the blip, the governments of the world took more and more power, and the Global Repatriation Council was given sweeping powers over the distribution of food, vaccines, medical supplies, and refugees. Again, we're seeing a pattern here. The more messed up everything gets, the more people are willing to give the government greater power over their lives. And who does this benefit?
Ross.
Exactly. Following Avengers Endgame, Stearns could have also worked to dismantle Tony Stark's posthumous control over global security. So in the movie Spider-Man Far From Home, we see that after Tony dies, he still has drones that police the world. So imagine if Stearns fed this information to a disgruntled Stark employee, Quentin Beck. He could have told him that Stark left these glasses to a teenager. Again, guys, I think it's one hell of a coincidence that Beck was able to figure out that Peter had the Edith glasses to begin with. And Stearns would have known exactly how to manipulate events for Beck to gain S.H.I.E.L.D.'s trust. How else would he have known so much about the national security apparatus? But I mostly think that Beck was aligned with Stearns for two reasons. One, the events of Far From Home lead to the government seizing Stark technology. And who does that benefit? Once again, Thunderbolt Ross. But two, Beck correctly guesses the name of this universe.
There are multiple realities, Peter. This is Earth, Dimension 616. I'm from Earth 833.
Remember, that's also the name that Christine of Universe 838 gave to the MCU.
Our universe is 838, and we've designated yours 616.
Oh.
And that brings me to the most important question. Why? Why did Stearns really do all of this, and what did he want? Well, in the movie, he says that all he ever wanted was to be free, to go back to his old life. But I think he would have been able to predict the high probability that Ross would betray him. After all, the movie is about him showing the world that Ross cannot change. And also, why else would he have fed Ross Gamba pills over several years if he didn't always know that Ross was going to turn on him? So think about that post-credit scene. He tells Sam that there are other worlds, and that the others are coming. Now, as we've talked about a lot on this channel, the real threat in Avengers Doomsday will likely be incursions, as Reed Richards describes them here.
An incursion occurs when the boundary between two universes erodes and they collide, destroying one or both entirely.
In the comic event Time Runs Out, the heroes have to actually defeat the heroes from other universes in order to save their own. But I don't think Stearns would know about incursions. Again, he doesn't have any data to this point. But he was able to calculate the existence of the multiverse, maybe because of the very public events of Spider-Man No Way Home, or because, like I mentioned earlier, this man is a probability calculator, and the multiverse is created from probabilities. So even though Stearns would not know about incursions, he would still understand one fundamental rule. when two worlds exist, one of them is always going to invade the other. We saw this all through human history, beginning with the apes arguing over watering holes, all the way up through the economic imperialism of the 20th century. So Stearns knows that in an infinite multiverse, there is an infinite number of forces that could invade the planet. So this means that there is a 100% probability that this universe will be invaded and destroyed. And the really scary thing is, if there is a 100% probability for the 616 universe to be destroyed, well, then it means that that same probability exists for every single universe. It's like they say at the end of Loki season 2, you just can't scale for infinity.
You can't scale for infinite.
When there are an infinite number of possibilities, then every possibility will always occur. So this means that Stearns knows the universe is doomed. He knows that his time on Earth is limited, and that's why, instead of using his intellect to conquer Earth, he just uses it to get revenge, because in his few final moments on Earth, he just wanted to torture Ross. But I don't think this is the end for the leader. He is the first person to tell Sam and the Avengers about a multiversal threat. Now, Doctor Strange also knows the multiverse is in danger, but remember, he's off in other dimensions with Clea. So, when the first multiversal event actually occurs in the 616 universe, Sam is going to have to turn to Samuel Stearns for information. This could set him up for a kind of redemption arc. He could be the Hannibal Lecter figure feeding the heroes information. But I think whatever information he feeds them, it's in the end only going to benefit him. We've said this a lot on the channel, but I really do think that Secret Wars is going to end with a soft reboot that finally simplifies this universe and this timeline. And I really hope that in this next iteration of the MCU, in phases 7 through 9, that they find a way to use the leader that is more nefarious than a just simple revenge story. But what do you guys think about this theory? Do you like the leader as a villain? Do you want to see them do more with him? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments or on our free to join Discord server. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.